He sounded small on the phone, and I felt like the ground tilted under me. "Mom, Claire-Lynne's knee is really swollen. Something's wrong." That first line is what I still hear when it's quiet, my oldest's voice at 16, muffled by a hoodie and worry, the way teenagers sound when they're trying not to panic but can't quite keep it together. I dropped the grocery bag I was carrying in town, left a half-drunk coffee on the counter, and drove 45 minutes home with my heart loud enough to drown the radio. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the sun had gone pale, and the house smelled like the evening, like laundry and wet grass, and my 10-year-old's knee looked nothing like it should. Swollen, ballooned, purple at the edges, and shining like a fruit under the skin. We bundled her into the car, the way you do with small emergencies, blankets, stuffed animal, the faint smell of Play-Doh still on her fingers, and I drove to the nearest urgent care. They didn't make us wait. A nurse took one look and said, "ER, now." She wheeled us through sliding doors like a procession and called ahead to the city's big children's hospital. The surgery that night felt both surreal and painfully ordinary. Surgeons moved with a calm that I would later learn was practiced like prayer. They removed 54 cc's of fluid from Claire-Lynne's knee joint and sent it to the lab. The surgeon leaned in, a white mask and soft eyes, and said, "We'll culture this. We're looking for infection." But the cultures returned clean. No bacteria, no typical inflammatory markers. The knee should have told us its story. Instead, it whispered, and the doctors shrugged with professional worry. What followed was 7 years of being moved from one specialist to another like a piece of mail no one could properly address. Pediatric rheumatologists, orthopedists, infectious disease teams, MRIs that looked like art, blood panels with names I could never say. Every test answered one question and opened 3 more. We lived on that knife's edge between hope and new alarms. Each doctor who said, "We'll monitor," left us with a new blank space to feel our way through. At first the pain was local, a swollen knee here, an occasional limp there, but by the time Claire-Lynne was 14, the landscape of her body had changed. Pain lived in her joints the way the ocean lives in a shell. Toes, ankles, knees, hips, fingers, wrists, elbows, shoulders, spine, neck. A map of points that flared and cooled and flared again. On most days, she rated her pain a 7 out of 10. On bad days, she could not get out of bed without the whole household rearranging itself around getting her through it. She missed school, soccer, sleepovers. She missed the small things, the way the sunlight used to hit her hair on the porch in summer, the habit of drawing elaborate houses on scrap paper. We chased answers across state lines. I learned the names of hospitals like they were towns on a map of possibility. The clinic 2 hours west, a specialist in another state who was known in forums under a nickname, a center with a pediatric pain program that accepted referrals. We paid out of pocket for consultations when insurance balked. We sat in waiting rooms with magazines from years ago and toddlers with stuffed tigers, and I learned how to look like someone gathering facts rather than screaming for help. Because screaming does not usually get you the kind of careful attention that a zebra diagnosis, something rare and unexpected, requires. There is a medical aphorism I kept hearing in the background as months turned into years. When you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. It's practical, meant to prevent chasing fantastical diagnoses when common conditions are more likely. I understand why doctors are taught that, but zebras exist. That's what I learned the hard way. A crowd of professionals can be certain they're hearing horses, and yet a tiny patient in the corner can be a rare animal with a name that no one at the start knows. I'll be honest, there were low, ugly moments. In the small town where we live, strip malls, church bake sales, the school where the teachers know your name, people began to ask thinly veiled questions. Is it growing pains? Someone suggested at a holiday dinner, as if our daughter had chosen this. A parent at soccer practice shook my hand and said, "Have they tried physical therapy?" with a look that suggested if only we would do the obvious, we'd be fine. My husband and I spent nights arguing in whispers because hospitals bristle at panic and insurance hates drama. I lay awake with the glow of the laptop and thought, what if there's no diagnosis? What if this is a life sentence without a name? The turning point for me was not a dramatic, cinematic montage. It was a quiet insistence. While scrolling forums late at night, exhausted, I began keeping a notebook not for feelings, for data. Dates, symptoms, triggers, who she saw and what they said, meds tried and doses, reactions. I drew timelines. I taped photos of the swollen knee next to clinic printouts. That small ledger became my evidence file. I started seeing patterns I could not unsee. Hyperextensible joints in childhood photos, a history of sprains that seemed excessive, skin that bruised with an odd generosity. I began to suspect a connective tissue disorder, but in medicine, suspicion needs more than intuition. It needs a name and a test. We kept pushing. We scheduled consultations with doctors who specialized in the less trodden corners of pediatric medicine. A geneticist at a university hospital, a pediatric clinical geneticist who had published papers on connective tissue anomalies, a rheumatologist who had spent a career distinguishing common inflammatory disorders from rarities. Each appointment was a small step forward. Each answered something and left me with a dozen new forms to file. We got referred to a few places because, as I learned, rare disease care often requires networks, a knot of specialists who share records and expertise. I remember the morning we finally got the appointment at the genetics clinic, September 2018. The waiting room smelled like coffee and Lysol. The receptionist's screen reflected my own tired face. Claire-Lynne was 17 then, quiet in the corner with a hoodie pulled up, earbuds in because the world had become louder than she could carry. The genetic counselor took us in and spoke in a slow, patient cadence that made space for the long story we had to tell. When the geneticist came in, a woman with a low voice and quick eyes, she examined Claire-Lynne with a tenderness that made me breathe differently. She checked hypermobility, asked about wound healing, noted a history of constipation, a small detail that for some reason kept appearing in families with certain connective tissue disorders. And then she said the sentence I'd been leaning toward for months like a ladder. "We're going to run an EDS panel." Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. The name had been a scrawled possibility in my notebook months earlier, and now it was a real thing the doctor said aloud. Ehlers-Danlos, a group of connective tissue disorders with several types, some of which can present with joint hypermobility, skin that tears or bruises easily, and chronic pain. The particular type we suspected affects collagen, the scaffolding of the body, and can cause joints to dislocate, tissues to be fragile, and pain that is relentless. It's not always obvious in childhood. Sometimes it's a slow reveal. You should have seen my daughter when the geneticist spoke the words. She laughed, a brittle sound that was two things at once, disbelief and relief. She had been told for years, in small ways or not, that some of it might be in her head. To hear a doctor say, with her credentials and clear test plans, that this was not imagination but biology, it felt like a door unlocked. The EDS diagnosis, confirmed by a genetic test, was both an ending and a beginning. It explained a lot. The odd falls, the scars that took forever to heal, the way her joints would ache after a day of wearing shoes or after carrying a heavy backpack. But it also opened new fights, with insurance companies for coverage of physical therapy, with schools about 504 plans and accommodations, with friends and family who wanted a tidy fix that didn't exist. Some relatives took the diagnosis as a relief, others as an invitation to worry in louder tones about future generations. My own relief was a complicated knot. I felt vindicated and exhausted at once. Once we had the name, the work changed shape. It shifted from endless searching to building a care team and a life that could hold chronic illness. Pain management became central, not because doctors had a magic wand, they didn't, but because we could now target therapies known to help many people with connective tissue disorders. Physical therapy that emphasized joint stabilization, not just stretching. Low-impact conditioning and aquatherapy to build strength without brutalizing hypermobile joints. Occupational therapy to adapt daily tasks. A pain psychologist to teach coping tools for a teen whose friends were sleeping late while she measured every step for fear of a flare. A genetic counselor who explained the inheritance patterns and answered hard questions about siblings and the future. We learned to ask for what we needed and then to insist when the system pushed back. We also found allies, a pediatrician who would advocate with our insurance company, a school nurse who learned the right way to help Claire-Lynne self-administer certain meds, parents in online groups who had learned how to read clinical notes and how to push for the tests that matter. I learned to collect records like a librarian collects books, keep them organized, label them, and don't be shy about asking for copies. When the clinic's nurse said, "We'll fax these to your doctor," I started saying, "I need paper copies as well." Paper becomes proof. There were moments of complicated triumph. The first time Claire-Lynne walked through the grocery store without wincing because her hips had been strengthened enough to carry a week's worth of food, we both cried in the car afterwards. The first time a school assembly didn't leave her breathless, we celebrated with pizza. The first time she told a friend calmly, "I have a condition called Ehlers-Danlos," and the friend asked a question instead of flinching, that felt like social medicine. There were also administrative victories that felt disproportionately satisfying. Getting an insurance prior authorization for a specialized knee brace after submitting months of physical therapy notes, and a letter from the orthopedist. Securing adaptive PE by meeting with the principal and showing how participation with accommodations helped rather than hurt the school's attendance metrics. These are the small bureaucratic battles that, when won, translate into a better day for a child. This is not a story of miraculous cure. There's no tidy climax where the villain is unmasked and carted away. Instead, the payoff was a slow reconfiguration. Knowledge that the pain was not a failing on Claire-Lynne's part or mine. A care team that actually listened. Strategies that reduced dislocations and allowed a teen to keep some semblance of a childhood. And a legal and medical paper trail that protected us when systems weren't sure how to respond. If you're in the long, hungry years of looking for answers, here are 3 practical things I learned that mattered more than anything else. First, document everything. Dates, symptoms, who said what. Medical records are narrative armor. When a specialist asks, "When did this start?" you can answer with a timeline instead of a guess. Photographs of swelling, logs of pain scores, emails from school, they all add up. Second, build a team and ask for coordination. Rare conditions rarely sit in one specialty. You'll need doctors who talk to each other, a primary care provider who coordinates referrals, and if possible, a genetic counselor to interpret tests. Ask for copies of reports, and when a provider recommends monitoring, ask what that means in months and metrics. Third, seek community and advocacy. Online forums, local support groups, and parents who have walked the same path are invaluable. They'll recommend the right specialist, the right brace, or how to phrase an appeal to insurance. You don't have to reinvent every wheel. If you're listening now because your child is in pain and the answers are thin, don't stop. There is an exhaustion that comes with persistence. I know it. There is also a stubbornness that is a kind of love. Our family's life didn't become perfect once we had a diagnosis, but it became truer. We could stop explaining, stop defending, and start treating. We learned to plan for flares, to keep extra braces in our car, to carry a small ultrasound gel in case we needed to show a clinician where it hurts. We learned to be our daughter's best advocate, not to become a medical expert overnight, but to insist that the experts listen. This is the thing I want to leave you with. Answers alter the shape of fear. The toughest years are not erased by a diagnosis, they're reframed. Knowing that Claire-Lynne's pain had a name did not erase the nights she cried into my shoulder, but it made our fight strategic instead of frantic. It let us choose therapies, apply for supports, and teach a teenage girl how to ask for help without shame. If this story resonated, hit like and subscribe. Keep the receipts, keep the records, and keep looking. The answer might be a zebra, awkward, rare, and stubborn to find, but it's out there. And finding it changes everything.